Welcome back. National Treasury has taken a drastic step of withholding the local government equitable share tranche for 75 municipalities nationwide. This intervention is aimed at curbing persistent financial mismanagement and compelling councils to settle multi-billion rand debts owed to bulk service providers like Eskom and water boards. The Treasury invoked Section 216, subsection 2 of the Constitution and Section 38 of the Municipal Finance Management Act, which allow for suspension of funds in cases of serious or persistent material breach of financial standards. Let's unpack this with governance expert, Professor Alex van den Heever. Prof, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We report a lot and speak a lot about dysfunctional municipalities. How would you welcome this decision by Treasury?
I think this is an essential move, and it's been a long time coming. Essentially what they're doing is they're top slicing the allocation to the municipalities in order to fund things that those municipalities should have been financing on a mandatory basis. You can't not pay bulk suppliers. You can't not pay pensions. So this is what these municipalities have been doing, and largely the reason why they're in financial difficulties is because of a massive irregular expenditure, systemic corruption, which is not being managed by the relevant provinces, which can take action, and other supervisory structures. So there's a complete failure of governance within many of these municipalities, and therefore they will not self-correct easily. So this is really an essential move from National Treasury.
Prof, if you could explain also what the Section 216, subsection 2 of the Constitution actually entails. So they're not going to get this tranche in particular, but they'll still be getting other municipal funds.
Well, they're in a position to spend money they've raised themselves, but this affects the municipal equitable share allocation, which is an allocation that is allocated equitably to all municipalities to finance their basic services. So what's happening is that although that is meant to be in lieu of revenue that the municipalities might raise themselves, this is actually money that's coming on an unconditional basis from National Treasury directly to municipalities. The problem is that there appears to be no accountability structure working within these municipalities, which means that they are not actually utilizing those funds as they should, and with serious consequences for their communities. So what they're essentially doing is holding back that money, and they're going to use that money to pay the bulk suppliers directly. So they're effectively transferring that money to what those municipalities should have been spending it on. That means that they will have only the money they raise from their own revenue, which might be quite minimal, because in many cases, these municipalities are not performing very well on revenue collection, and there's significant corruption in the provision of basic services. As a consequence, it allows many people to basically steal the basic services as well, which means there's a huge loss of revenue to these municipalities as well. So probably they're going to be in a real financial difficulties, but this debt has to be paid because it's now running into the tens of billions and can't remain on this basis. It has to be staunched.
Yeah, and as you're saying, coming in on an unconditional basis as well, and when we know that there is a lack of accountability and mass corruption, something's got to give. But when you're mentioning that these tranche payments also finance basic service delivery, will the residents be affected? I think I heard you say that actually Treasury will now pay directly to those boards. So service delivery should not be impacted by this decision.
Yeah, in theory it shouldn't, because that's where the money should have gone. So what's the problem has occurred is that these municipalities are not paying suppliers, they're not paying for bulk provision, and they're diverting those funds in many cases for corrupt purposes, and it has become systemic. It will relate in many cases to the way in which the entire provincial government is being run as well. So the problem is that the accountability structures that might operate at the provincial level are also not operating. So essentially this requires that national government take action, because the provinces are also not doing anything. And they're compromised because the corruption extends in many cases to provincial political structures. It's a political. The access points to these municipalities are through in many cases, ANC municipalities, and the ANC has been compromised at a provincial level, and this has impacted on who's appointed and how they perform, and whether or not systemic corruption is actually allowed to continue indefinitely. So unless this type of action is taken, it will just continue, and the situation will get worse. And it's important to note that the knock-on effects are not only to those communities. If we don't pay the water boards and we don't pay Eskom, then the knock-on effect is for the country as a whole, because then we basically make our bulk suppliers insolvent as well as a consequence of these municipalities. So it's essential that the money is now top sliced and allocated directly to the bulk suppliers, and it's up to the municipalities to sort themselves out.
So it's basically just cutting out the middleman. But, when you mentioned the corruption also going to a provincial level, but also the ANC being compromised also at a national level, looking at this model of the Treasury just paying the boards directly, paying Eskom directly, obviously this is not how a government should function, but should that be possibly the next step of what we're looking at, of how we can maybe get our ducks back in a row?
Yeah, I think that Treasury is actually, and the Minister of Finance, they've taken this as a last resort, because this has been discussed for quite a while. This is the natural solution when municipalities are failing systematically, and then it has a knock-on effect nationally on our core utilities. Top slicing and direct allocation. So I think they've avoided doing that, attempting to operate through the existing legal structures. And the problem has been that it hasn't solved the problem. It hasn't actually dealt with it. We've also not had the political process sort this out. In other words, communities actually sorting out the kind of people that get elected into running the municipalities. So the problem is that you end up with no accountability operating, but billions of rands being allocated into these municipalities, which is then squandered. So essentially, we've got this problem has to be stopped. So at this point in time, provincial government hasn't done its job in those particular provinces where these essentially defective municipalities are operating, and national government does have to step in. The political dynamic within the ANC operates at a provincial and a national level, and there are different dynamics. So in some provinces, they're compromised locally. So essentially, this is a case where the fact that it might be an ANC government that is taking action here, it is because they're actually trying to solve a problem that is being caused by, in many cases, the capture of political structures at a provincial level.
What do you think this will do on that when it comes to the ANC for the upcoming local government elections?
Well, this type of action is actually meant to be a cleanup. It's meant to kind of stop these municipalities from failing. It is the last action, the most extreme action that can be taken, apart from putting the people in jail, which is actually what should be happening. But the people who would take that direct action are inactive at this point in time. So this is a way of doing a cleanup. It's a warning shot across the bows. And if there is no action taken, essentially what they're doing is that they're impacting on essentially the very negative political games that are being played within patronage politics that is operating largely within the provincial structures in the ANC, which is resulting in their failure from a political perspective, because they don't deliver anything. And there is going to be a penalty to be paid at the ballot box.
Yeah, and just finally, Prof, not all corners have welcomed this decision by National Treasury. SAMWU has slammed it. SALGA, the South African Local Government Association, has also expressed its concerns about this. What do you make about SAMWU slamming this, but also SALGA, more importantly, saying that there's been shortcomings to this process, and they're also accusing National Treasury of not being forthcoming with them as well?
Yeah, I don't think that that's a very valid argument. Look, SALGA is largely made up of the majority ANC municipalities as members, so it's not surprising that they're going to have this position, and SAMWU as well. So the alignment is there, and they themselves have not been very effective in dealing with the causes of the problems of municipal delivery and service delivery and corruption. They haven't solved any of that. They've not been helpful at all. So in essence, as I said, this is a last resort. I would have said that I would have done this, considered this, if I were in Treasury. I'd have considered this from about 2019 rather than 2025. But it's basically come to a head. It's now impossible to ignore fiscally. It is a serious hemorrhaging of our fiscal position in South Africa, and it cannot be afforded anymore. So in terms of process, government, the National Treasury has introduced measures to try and get the municipalities to change their ways over the last 2 years. It just hasn't been taken up. So essentially, process has been considered. We have the Municipal Finance Management Act. These municipalities are in a contravention of the Municipal Finance Management Act. There should be disciplinary action against the senior officials in all of these municipalities. That would also extend to the members of the executive councils that are operating. That action should be taken. People should be dismissed. People should be in jail. None of that is happening. And I would say that Solga and some would have a credible argument if some of that were actually taking place. But it's because none of that is happening. There is nothing else to do but top slice for the moment and try and sort out the problem with what is in many cases criminal municipalities operating, just stealing the funds of the state.
Prof, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.